Honorable dignitaries, dear guests, and esteemed panelists, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We greet you with the greeting of peace. Welcome to our joint Education Above All Foundation and UNESCO session entitled Advancing Access to Higher Education Opportunities for the Most Marginalized. My name is Samah, Senior Education Consultant with the Education Above All Foundation and Director of the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. It is an absolute pleasure and a blessing to be your moderator this afternoon. In today's packed session, we will present you with a panel of experts on a topic of critical importance, one that seeks to catalyze the integration of vulnerable migrants, refugees, and underserved youth into the tertiary education sector, inclusive of technical vocational education and training, hence providing access routes and essential pathways to the workforce and to economic empowerment and mobility. But first, let us turn to a brief video from the Education Above All Foundation. Thank you very much, and thank you for your attentive viewership of that brief video on how the Education Above All Foundation and its partners have and will continue to work with change agents in the least developed countries to achieve increased access and quality of education, SDG 4. If there's one thing that COVID has taught all of us is to have a very merciful relationship with information technology and IT and technology in general. So thank you very much to the IT team who made this possible. Our session is segmented into two parts. We begin with a panel of experts with direct policy formulation, policy enactment, and advocacy roles. We meet with this panel of experts in just a couple of minutes. And we have this panel of experts to focus on the recognition and the assessment of prior learning and the provision of access to higher education and economic empowerment for the most marginalized. My colleague Asma Fikri will introduce our second panel, comprised of youth voices and advocates on access to higher education a little later. But I would like to now call upon our first esteemed panelists who are joining me right here in the panel. We start with Mrs. Yayoi Segi-Vitchek, Chief of Section, Migration, Displacement, Emergencies, and Education with UNESCO. Yayoi is the Chief of Section of Migration, as I just mentioned. She has since worked in all aspects of education and intersectoral initiatives, including youth and culture in Vietnam, the Pacific states based on Apia, Samoa, Eastern Africa based in Nairobi, and the Arab region based in Beirut. Prior to UNESCO, Yayoi worked for the ILO in Geneva and an international program to combat child labor through education. In the area of international educational emergencies, Yayoi has headed UNESCO's operations in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Somalia, and served as the representative of GPE Coordinating Agency and co-chair of the local education group in Yemen. Currently, Yayoi is leading the coordination of UNESCO's educational response in the war against Ukraine. Next, also, we have Ms. Hind Zainal, Executive Director of Strategy, Management, and Partnerships with Qatar Foundation Higher Education Division. Hind is the Executive Director, and she is an experienced management executive specializing in transformation, innovation, and design thinking. She's previously worked as a consultant in the Office of the Chairperson at Qatar Foundation and at various other projects with an international focus. Next, we have Mr. Luca Lantero, who is to my right, Director General of Information on the Information System on Academic Mobility and Equivalence in Italy, and Acting President for the Lisbon Recognition Convention Committee. Luca Lantero is the current director, as I just mentioned, and he is an expert on Italian international level credentialing in higher education, as well as the recognition of foreign higher education credentials outside of Italy, among many other areas of expertise. From 2018 to 2020, he has been the head of the Bologna Follow-Up Group, Secretariat of the European Higher Education Area, and since 2019, he is the president of the Lisbon Recognition Convention Committee, and he's the current head of ASEM Education Secretariat. In 2022, he was the elected member of the Bureau of the Ethics, Transparency, and Integrity Platform of the Council of Europe. Luca is definitely not intimidated by a panel full of women, especially the day after International Women's Day. So yay, Luca. Next, we have Ms. Marina, who is president of the Association for International Credential Evaluation Professionals. And Marina has almost 20 years of experience in the field of international education and credential evaluation. She served as an elected member of the Admission and Recognition Cooperation for Development and is an expert between 2017 and 2022. Since 2015, she has been working on developing special recognition procedures for refugees and vulnerable migrants at national and international levels in her role as a content coordinator of the European Qualifications Passport for Refugees by the Council of Europe and UNESCO Qualifications Passport for Refugees. Last but not least, we have Ms. Vivian, also to my right, Vice President for Sustainability and Campus Life with Sciences Po. In this capacity, she has headed the institution's strategic commitments within the framework of the 2030 UN Agenda, with a particular focus on student well-being, onboarding and support services, diversity, equity, and inclusion, a vibrant and meaningful campus life for all, and programs for refugee and displaced students and scholars, as well as the university's overarching sustainable campus strategy. We will also have words during this first segment from virtual experts. Our first is Dr. Roberta Malee Bassett, Global Lead for Tertiary Education and Senior Education Specialist at the World Bank. We also have Mr. Arash Bordbar, Associate Education Officer with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Arash supports the 15 by 30 strategy to increase refugee enrollment in higher education. And last but not least, we have Mr. Joel Kamoko, Permanent Secretary of Education Services with the Ministry of Education in Zambia. Prior to our panel discussion, it is my great pleasure to invite Ms. Stefania Giannini to deliver her opening remarks. Ms. Giannini, joining us virtually on the screens that you see to the side, was appointed UNESCO Assistant Director General in 2018, where she provides strategic vision and leadership in coordinating and monitoring the Education 2030 strategy agenda encompassed in SDG 4. During her term, she has given fresh impetus to multilateral and bilateral partnerships, increased focus on education's ethical role in providing learners with the skills that respond to 21st century challenges. She affirmed UNESCO's leadership in the COVID-19 response through global evidence, guidance, policy dialogue, and collaboration with all partners, including through the Global Education Coalition in 2022. And she led the landmark Transforming Education Summit, convened by the UN Secretary General, which propelled education to the very top of the political agenda. Ms. Giannini, we are anxiously excited to hear your words.
Recent steps that have been done a few days ago by member states unanimously here at UNESCO in 2019 and 2024. Sound behind, I cannot continue my okay. So I was saying that on the 5th March, the Global Convention for the Recognition of Degrees and Qualification in Higher Education has been entered into force. It has been adopted in 2019 at the General Conference of UNESCO. And this is really the very first treaty of the UN to make mobility, recognition of qualifications, and broadly speaking, higher education a real right to all the students in the world. This is at least the ambition. Now 21 countries adopted, ratified the convention, and there is a process where other so that's this is a very important part of the story. As you know, more than 235 million people are currently enrolled in universities globally. Of these, 6.3 million are international students, but this is a number which doubled recently in the last 20 years, and it's likely to double from now to 2020, 30, 2040, in the next two decades, so to say. So the problem in this positive story is about right education to higher education not being for all, actually. And let me remind other two important figures. Did you know that more than 74% of refugees are hosted in low and middle income countries? I'm sure many of you know that, but do you know also that the 6% of forcibly displaced young people have access to higher education against 40%, which is the average globally? So these figures, simple figures, underline how important it is that host countries be supported to put inclusion at the heart of higher education policies and practices. And this is where UNESCO's qualification passport comes in. It's an entry point to address concretely, effectively inclusion through a systemic lens, I would say. Its impact on the real lives of refugees and vulnerable migrants and on the societies in which they live is immense, is huge. Today we'll have the opportunity, and thanks to the organizer and himself, to give us to hear from the real voice, from a concrete story from Melody Burema, who studied in my country, in Italy, thanks to the qualifications passport after having been forced to flee his home. I heard is hosted and is continuing his studies in Brescia, in the north of the country. And I'm sure you will agree with me that when we recognize a person's qualifications, we don't only acknowledge skills and competences of this person, which is of course very much important, But we also, and most importantly, from my perspective, honor her own dignity. And the success of the qualifications passport is thanks to strong international cooperation between UNESCO and UNHCR, first of all, but also within national qualifications authorities and credential evaluators across the world. And this is an opportunity also to me for really express my personal and institutional gratitude to all these partners. In this regard, let me also thank the government of Zambia for the extraordinary support they provided since the beginning during the piloting of the qualification passport. It's a promising sign that in the last month alone, 8 passport holders have received admissions letters to university courses in the country. But we want to stop here. We want to really leverage the power and the task that we have of this qualification passport, and we want to make our mission and our task in this important domain of education increasingly higher and more effective. Thank you also to Levi and other possibility-based young people who have put their trust in the qualification passport and UNESCO. I'm very much also thrilled to announce that just this morning UNESCO and Education Above All have agreed to formalize our cooperation and to expand the reach and the impact of the qualification passport, and thanks to colleagues involved for that. I am very sure that together we can support the development of equitable and resilient higher education systems. All we are doing, all we are trying to improve is about democratizing higher education system and making universities, studies and higher education a real integral part of the right education. Failure to act is not an option for all of us, we know. I wish you a very fruitful discussion and thanks for having me.
A warm show of appreciation for those words from Ms. Stefania Giannini, especially with respect to the systematic lens that is required to convert policy dreams into policy actions, and quite promising strategic steps being taken forward in this regard. And now turning to our panel experts and this very important topic of refugee access and vulnerable migrants and marginalized youth and their access to the recognition of any experience and credentials. It is important to note that refugees, vulnerable migrants, and marginalized youth worldwide face those numerous obstacles and challenges as they try to rebuild their lives in new countries. One of the most significant barriers that they encounter is the lack of recognition of achieved learning and acquired skills. This can be particularly challenging for refugees who have experienced displacement, have lost access to earned credentials and parchments, essentially holding them up from being able to be accepted into universities. They've experienced this displacement and lost documentation, and this actually hampers their ability to transfer. We fully recognize that learning happens within both formalized and informal environments, and they can be gained, these skill sets, often at a greater level of fidelity outside of educational institutions with self-learning, hands-on application, and also in working with apprentices. Along with these experiences, marginalized youth, as mentioned, often have limited access to accredited parchments and transcripts to prove that they have these skill sets. The UNESCO Qualifications Passport, or UQP, for refugees is a mechanism to address this barrier, providing a standardized framework for evaluating and recognizing educational qualifications. The recognition of prior learning is a process that recognizes and values an individual's prior learning, knowledge, and skills. And without further ado, we want to hear from this panel of experts and their broad experiences applying the recognition of prior learning to various vulnerable and marginalized youth. We start with our first question, and I pose this question starting off with Yayoi on my far left, as well as Mr. Luca on my right. Ms. Yayoi and Mr. Luca, how critical is increasing access to tertiary education, inclusive of higher education and technical vocational education and training, and broadening opportunities for integration into the labor market for refugees, displaced persons, and vulnerable migrants? In particular, to what extent is the recognition of prior learning and acquired skills an essential step for increasing this access? Ms. Yayoi.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to join Assistant Director General in thanking Educational Bubble for co-organizing this crucial event. And I think we could not have organized this at a better time where, as Ms. Giannini mentioned, that we have only 6% of vulnerable youth affected by crisis situation enrolled in tertiary education. So the fact that we have this forum today at the margin of ADC 5 conference, it testifies to the fact the importance of this matter and how we can come together to address. But before coming to the points that you asked, very big question, I'd like to recognize the presence of prominent delegate of Qatar to UNESCO and thanking him for the strong commitment, personal and commitment, also Qatar's commitment to supporting UNESCO in education emergency situations around the world. Now, straight away, I just want to echo what's been said already by ADG, and I think it's crucial to recognize and to guarantee that the tertiary education is it's a fundamental human right for all youth, regardless of their status and location, and this must be protected and prioritized, particularly in times of a crisis situation, knowing very well that education, the skills and the competencies that young people gain is a life-saving for their life, their family life, and society. To cope with the situation, but also grow out of the crisis situations. In this regard, I just want to mention, as of course mentioned by Assistant Director General, that you mentioned Dr. Samah as well, that UN Secretary General recognized the crucial importance of education as a transforming societies around the world. And on this occasion, we launched the Call to Action Partnership for Transformative Educations in crisis situations, where 35 countries endorsed it, including Qatar and many countries around the world, to recognize how crucial education is, particularly in times of crisis. And I want to point out, and within this Call to Action Partnership for Transformative Education, transformative actions, recognition of prior learning, and skills and knowledge is one transformative action fully recognized, and we really look forward to, of course, continuing to work with partners. Indeed, having said that, we know very well that there are too many obstacles around the world confronting young people, not only from protection part, but also on education, what it takes for them to pursue learning. They may have obtained primary and secondary education in their home countries, or having fled, may have done so in host countries, but tertiary education is very much a distant reality for many around the world. But we have to start from somewhere, instead of saying that it's a distant reality, where we start, and UQP is an excellent entry point in this regard, really recognizing the partners we've had to date with Norway and Italy, with Luca and Marina, and also Council of Europe and UNHCR, what it takes to make sure that the young people who have had to flee and who have what it takes to pursue learning, and they need the valid documentation to pursue. So recognition is a key entry point. In fact, it's the prerequisite to further moving on. And that's what I said, the UQP is the most critical tool, together with the EQPR, for instance, is instituted by Council of Europe, and we have now international and regional conventions in place to frame certain action in this sense. I guess that one last point before listening to other distinguished panel members is, as mentioned by IDG as well, and the one thing to recognize prior learning and the knowledge of individuals whose right it is that we must protect and prioritize, but important is to support member states to strengthen the system so that these practices that we have in place become sustainable and institutionalized within the national commitments to inclusion of all who are in need, and of course to respect and to also to the right to education for in the given context. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yayoi, for those excellent words. Again, underscoring the systematization that is required to promote the recognition of learning. And now I turn it to Mr. Luca.
Thank you. Thanks a million. Thank you for your kind invitation here. I'm very proud to be here with you. I would like to start from another angle, the perspective of a credential evaluator, so who evaluate everyday qualifications. We discover after 40 years of experience of our center that at the end, we don't evaluate pieces of papers, but we really evaluate pieces of life of people. And this is the first point. So it's not related only to refugees, it's related to people. Thanks to the Lisbon Recognition Convention that was drafted and entered into force in 1997, the so-called second generational convention that inspired also the global and other convention, the recognition became a personal right of the people, like a right of health, of safety, right, like the right of education. So the term fair recognition, it's the main point for us. And this is very interesting also because relating to prior learning is peculiar that the Lisbon Recognition Convention never mentioned that term, never mentioned prior learning or recognition prior learning. But why now we can recognize also informal, not formal, prior learning experiences, thanks to the Lisbon Recognition Convention? Because it's not a set of procedures, it's a set of principles based, ontologically based on the right of fair recognition. And this is the reason why it's so actual now and modern, and we don't need to change that text. And also the Global Convention is like that. In the Global Convention, you didn't find the term fair recognition as it was in the Lisbon, because they speak about more, in a more modern way, equitable access. They focus more on the access, on the consequences, because at the end, the right is also established in the preamble. But this is the main point for us. And how is possible for a credential evaluator, someone that need a credential to evaluate, to perform his job, to evaluate something without qualification, without documents? The first question that I receive from people when we say, oh, since 60 years, we evaluate in Italy and in Europe and globally with the EQP qualification for people without documents. And they say, how is it possible? Because if you think that a qualification is a set of competencies that is certified in a way with a paper, with documents, instead to evaluate papers or documents, you have to evaluate declarations and competencies. And the mix of those two elements give you an idea about the situation of the person. And I really want to say to you that for the 100% of cases, we are sure if a person obtains a qualification or not at the end. So it means that the procedure is sympathetic to the situation of a refugee or refugee-like situation people, because they don't have documents. It's really a point of reality. But it's an objective and very professional one. So it means that, I give you some data, we recognize we evaluate 2,500 qualifications from refugees without document in Italy, and we recognize the 75% for a lot of reasons. As people cannot receive a recognition to access in one university with normal qualification, is the same for refugees. So it means that this is the main point for us. But everything, and I would like to stress again that point, start from that principle of right, of obtain a fair recognition. And this is also an added value for normal procedures. But then we have time to speak about that point as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Luca, for that. And what beautiful words We don't assess pieces of paper, we recognize lives, lived experiences, and competencies. Very well said. And to build on that, we're going to hear the perspective from UNHCR, from Mr. Arash Bordbar, Associate Education Officer from UNHCR. So we'll play that video and get back to our panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be among you all today, and I apologize for not being able to be there in person. My name is Arash Bordbar. I work with UNHCR Education Section based in Copenhagen, and I primarily focus on tertiary education. To set the scene, ensuring access to education in a world characterized by ongoing conflicts and protracted forced displacement situation is vital. Over the last decades, we've seen that refugee situations are rarely temporary. Today, we have reached more than 100 million displaced people around the world, many of whom find themselves in protracted displacement, spanning several or all cycles of their education. Providing refugees with access to inclusive and equitable quality education remains key to building their future and breaking the drivers of displacement, enabling peace and development for their communities and countries back home. There is a need to include refugees in national institutions on the same terms as nationals and ensure their academic credentials are recognized. Access to national education systems together with the host communities is the key for displaced children and youth to be included in the education from the beginning and to be on a path to contribute back to the community in which they live in. Investing in higher education has the highest return on investment. Investment in the final years of education results in the greatest financial gains. The effect is particularly strong for women. Those with tertiary education may make 3 times as much as those without formal education. Higher education improves the self-reliance of refugees by giving them an opportunity to earn qualification in market-related fields. And once graduated, refugees contribute to the national economy. It also really helps to ease the pressure on the community that hosts them by increasing resources for national higher education institutions. However, refugees encounter many barriers in accessing higher education opportunities. And the barriers are not only financial. Legal, administrative, financial, and cultural barriers can hinder access to education at all levels and become especially steep at secondary and tertiary level. Lack of proof of prior learning or failure to recognize education qualifications or certificates can make re-entry or placement at the current grade level a challenge. And I'm sure many colleagues today will speak about qualification passports and how recognizing these qualifications, the career qualifications, will make a huge difference in the lives of refugees to continue their education journey. Expanding access to higher education and employment for refugees is closely linked to achieving the 4 core objectives of the Global Compact on refugees. Specifically, access to higher education can really strengthen higher education system in under-resourced locations and prepare refugees to achieve self-reliance and become net contributors in the communities that host them. It also gives them an additional skills and knowledge to contribute to the home countries should they be able to return in safety. The first step to harnessing the skills of refugee graduates after university is to ensure that more refugees have rights to work. Currently, more than 70% of refugees live in countries with restricted access to labor market. That means lost talent, lost opportunities, and often resort to precarious work. We as UNHCR are working with national governments to advocate for access to labor, to local labor markets, and economic inclusion for refugees, including access to decent work and the job trainings, financial services, and etc. Higher education and qualifications earned through it should be aligned to the labor market needs in the host countries so that those who wish to continue transition to meaningful work, they can. And we need to continually work to develop evidence to demonstrate and instill confidence among host country policymakers and community members that refugee participation in higher education and in the workforce can contribute to the national development. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon to all of you in Doha. My name is Roberta Malee Bassett. I'm the Global Lead for Tertiary Education at the World Bank, and it is my pleasure to represent the World Bank here today, albeit briefly in this video, at this symposium sponsored by Education Above All, and UNESCO to discuss the possibilities and opportunities afforded by tertiary education for refugees and displaced peoples around the world. For the World Bank, these issues of supporting higher education, post-secondary education for refugees and displaced peoples is not simply an intervention that helps a humanitarian crisis become less extreme. It is an intervention that supports sustained development in the host countries and the communities of refugees and displaced peoples who are often out of their countries and out of their homes and communities, not just for days or years, but for generations. The opportunities afforded by higher education, post-secondary learning, TVET, allows for refugees and displaced peoples to contribute more to their families, to their communities, to the economies of their host countries. This is a development imperative for countries that host displaced peoples. Otherwise, these are communities of peoples who have the capacity to contribute and are not allowed to do so. And that's just wasting human capital and the human potential of refugees and displaced peoples who wish to do more, who want to live better lives, and who have the right to do so. So I wish you all a wonderful day today. I hope this turns into a fruitful conversation, not just over the next few hours, but over the next few days and years, because this is a conversation we should keep going, and I look forward to being a part of it. Thank you so much again for this invitation. I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Zambia is proud, having worked with UNESCO and UNHCR over its refugee status, that it has received a number of qualified experts who have come in the country as a result of war or some such misfortune in their countries. What we recognize and see is that Zambia does not have a problem of recognizing and respecting prior learning. And we have had the support of 2 universities, Cavendish as well as UNLAS, who in themselves are very willing to take the students on. Our challenge as a developing country is that we would want to reach out to our refugee colleagues, but we do not have the means because our resources are scarce, as we have many challenges associated with free education. Nonetheless, the goodwill is there to participate in the learning passport to ensure that prior learning is actualized into possible skills, and that will be changing the lives and the status of our refugees and give them hope beyond becoming hopeless again when they cannot use the skills nor be able to be recognized for what they already had. In the immediate communities where they live, we would benefit as they would give expert quality service to the community, but also get paid for it, which in itself would encourage them to be law-abiding and not fear of being perpetual migrants. So Zambia's call to the world is that we should find sufficient resources to support the prior learning, to ensure that when our students get into these universities, they get the support, or these colleges, whatever it is that we choose to give them as skills, so that they are useful citizens, and wherever they move to, they'll be productive, and they'll be able then to make up for the loss that happened in their previous lives. It's extremely important for us to recognize that if these people do not have this established status quo, then we are actually affecting them twice. They lost out in countries of origin. They are not able to have a recognized professional status in countries where they go. So they are neither here nor there. They do not have the importance, nor do they have the means to earn a decent living. Ultimately, they are frustrated and therefore perpetually are on the move. So it is important that we give them their self-confidence by recognizing their prior skills and their knowledge, and ensuring that they have opportunity to upgrade and advance and offer services in our recognized institutions, so that way they are adding value to their own lives, but also reaching out to the beneficiary communities which have decided to settle and look after them. The call for Zambia is to recognize what UNESCO is doing along UNHCR, and also to recognize that refugees are human beings who globally we must not see as aliens, but as potential citizens who can add to the productivity of nations where they go and settle. And also, we should see them as potential experts who should add value in the communities where they go and live in, and wherever else they will go. And therefore, there is need to find a way of constantly giving them the confidence, the support, and the security, as opposed to making them become personas who have non-grantor and they find it difficult to find their feet when they go into other countries, yet they are qualified persons.
We now move to perspectives with respect to the key enablers in facilitating the recognition of qualifications for refugees and displaced persons. The question, and this question is posed to Ms. Marina, Mr. Luca, and Ms. Yayoi once again. Who are the key enablers? And how can these key enablers be engaged in reducing barriers for refugees to have prior learning and higher education credentials recognized? Some of you have touched on this topic already, but we are interested in hearing a little bit more detail on the key policy actors that are involved in making this a success. So turning to Marina, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you for your question, because it is indeed a very good starting point to understand how all the elements we have to put in place, how they're all connected to each other, and how we can identify our role as either credential evaluators, policy makers, government offices, admission offices at the university. So what is our place in this framework? What is our role, and how we can facilitate access also of refugee students, how we can make their path towards their personal development, towards realization of their dreams and ambitions real. Not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow, but today, because we have no time to waste. And especially speaking about this vulnerable population, refugees, people who are not always able to access to education, we have to remember that we have our mission to help these people to build their success. Me as a credential evaluator, of course, I will be speaking on behalf of what we have to do, what our community of practice has to put in place, how we have to connect our mission to other elements, how we have to conduct our work with the work which other stakeholders are doing, both depending on how our national systems are organized and how all the elements are connected internationally. So for me, as a credential evaluation professional, recognition is one of the most important steps. Why? Because this helps us to identify the talent, to understand what these people, what kind of background this person has, what does this person have ambitions to do, and what is feasible. We have to keep also in mind that we have to manage the expectations. We have to give the right information about the qualification to the person in question, explain how this qualification is evaluated, how this qualification is seen in the new context, how this qualification can be applied and seen in the, for example, in the new system of higher education in this new context, and how to navigate in the system. So, starting with the qualification, identifying the level, identifying what this person is able to do in this new system, providing the pathway, and explaining what is feasible and what is not feasible. By doing that, we then are able to put this person on the right track from the very beginning, enabling him to connect with the right authorities, with the right bodies at the right time, and also for us, being connected to other stakeholders, we create sustainable pathways, we create sustainable systems, frameworks for all applicants aspiring for higher education to succeed, also including the population of refugees and most vulnerable ones. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina, for those excellent words with respect to the administrative operationalization of recognition of credentials. We now turn back to Luca, if you would like to add some more details on the key enablers of recognition of prior learning based on your extensive experiences.
Thank you. On your video that you showed at the very beginning, there was a sentence that you say, only working together. And this is the point. Only working together we can, at national and international level, facilitate the kind of recognition. In a better way, the message is to spread the culture of recognition, because it's really a culture, a change of mind of people. not only people like us, normal people, but also people working in higher education institution or in institution. This is based on real experience that we have in Italy. We know that we are a center with 45 people, 35 language competencies, but we are not able alone to solve all the problems or respond to all the needs. And so what we create a group of experts within higher education institutions, and we teach to them. And we say, now you are the ones that can use that methodology. We are not jealous about our competency, really. And so we did the same in Greece, we did the same in Afghanistan, we did the same in Zambia, we did the same in other contexts when we go and work with institutions there in order to help them to recognize those qualifications for refugees, but also to have a capacity building activities also for a recognition in general, to spread that culture. I think another important point is to recognize that we are different as an academic culture, as a system of higher education or education in general. We are different. And this is an added value. And this is the reason why the approach that we use and have to be used as a suggestion to everyone is to help institutions to grow up in their competencies according to their system, according to their academic culture. Because, for example, this is an example of Zambia, it's a first step, in my view, to help the authorities to have a methodology to recognize refugee qualification. But then, as you said correctly, we have to involve higher education institutions in order to also accept them. Because after a refugee with a recognition said, okay, I'm recognized, and now? So it's important to spread that knowledge. And this is a fundamental point to work together in that sense.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Luca, for those words. We're actually going to jump ahead to our very next question and invite our other key panelists to speak. Based on your direct experiences, what does recognition of prior learning actually look like? We want to take the ambiguity away, and some of you have already shared some real voices from your experiences. So what does this assessment of prior learning look like when a refugee or a marginalized youth walks in with lack of credentials? And what does it look like when it's operationalized with the involvement of multiple stakeholders? What existing programs and interventions exist to increase access for refugees, displaced persons, and migrants? And how can these programs be scaled and amplified? And to this question, I pose this to Ms. Kate Vivian, Vice President for Sustainability and Campus Life with Sciences Po, and hearing the experiences of an educational institution and how you've been able to do this. I'll also pose the same question to Ms. Hind as well as Ms. Marina. Please, Kate.
Thank you so much, Samah, and thank you so much for the invitation to join this panel today. Indeed, I'm speaking from the perspective of a host institution, so I'm speaking with the experience that we have over a large number of years in working on the ground, and you spoke very clearly about that it is a chain of actors, and we are, to some extent, the last level of that chain, institutions, and I believe very strongly that as universities we have a significant responsibility in this chain to be agile, to be creative, to be responsive, and that's something that I think at Sciences Po in France we've been working on for a number of years, conscious of that responsibility and what that means for the students who are beneficiaries of our work. At Sciences Po, we've had, as I say, a long history of responding to the need to integrate and provide inclusion to a number of different populations, not only refugee students. The first pillar of that has been certainly the work that we've done at a national level in terms of social diversity, and that Sciences Po has been quite pioneering in that over the past 20 years, in our national context at least. The second is the work we've been doing on the African continent, working with students who are in significant poverty and working with the MasterCard Scholars Program, particularly in bringing them to Sciences Po over the past years. And the third, and the focus more particularly of the discussion today, is our initiatives and programs that we've put in place to be working in welcoming students and scholars in exile, refugee students, with a commitment to providing what we call academic refuge. And in this context in particular, we've been working very closely with the foundation, the Education Above All Foundation. I'll speak a little bit more about what that looks like in a minute. What's needed, in my view, on the ground, as I was saying, to make this a reality, from discourse to reality, is firstly that creativity, the agility, the ability to create new pathway programs, new initiatives that speak to different situations, not get bogged down by bureaucracy and constraints. I think that's very important. I believe that at universities we have that capacity and should do more in that space. Luca, you spoke about principles, not procedures. I love that sentence. I think that's very important in what we're doing on a daily basis. The second thing we really need is significant financial aid to these students. So we speak about recognition as the first entrance point. Very, very important, but obviously then their path to success needs to be worked on through a number of different ways, and one of them is indeed significant funding in partnership with the university and other partners to make sure that their success is a reality. And the third is really professional in-house wraparound support, what I see as going beyond the university walls, because it's one question to succeed at university, to have your credentials recognized, to be admitted, to be welcomed, to be financed. It's another thing to then be successful in your daily life, to have access to understand what it means to be a citizen and a member of the new community that you're in. And so I think that's extremely important that we provide support in navigating those systems as a university. With regards specifically to the third pillar, so the topic particularly of today, and I'll be brief, relative to welcoming refugee students, there is one particular initiative that we've worked very significantly on over the past 6 years now, and that's the Professional Certificate in the Social Sciences for Young Refugees. It's a pathway program, it's a 2-year pathway program that provides access to a third year through the ECTS European Credit Transfer System, provides access to any third-year program across Europe. And it's really a program that's been designed to be flexible and to adjust to students as they come to us as young refugees. And it's really, we've been able to do this over the past years through a number of ways. In particular, I mentioned before the support from the Education Above All Foundation, amongst others. And it's really a program that's part of a network across France of programs, pathway programs, that are dedicated to providing quality access to higher education and allow them to transition to their new life in France and then onto either higher education or the workforce. There are no academic prerequisites. We take students, as I say, as they are. We're able to then adjust to what they need and adapt the program to their requirements. And we bring them all up to that third year level, which then allows them to go on to do whatever they may desire. So I think that's a good concrete example of the way we're adjusting to the very different realities of students in these situations.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, for that very, very detailed response as to how to actually operationalize and enact this recognition of prior learning. We now turn to Hind Zainal. You also have a direct experience with recognizing credentials and facilitating and creating that linkage to higher education for students.
Absolutely. Thank you, Samah. Thank you for having me for this panel and to be part of this distinguished panel of experts. So in Qatar, we have a very recent and very concrete example of how we can support students. If it takes a village to raise a child, we realize that it takes a country to support 20 students that have come to us from Afghanistan. I'll speak about the stakeholders who are part of this group. We are in partnership with a number of stakeholders. We are in partnership with the Afghan robotics team, who's responsible for the Afghan students that we're supporting here in Qatar. We're doing this in partnership with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have our funding partner, who's Qatar Fund for Development. And then within Qatar Foundation, we are working across higher education, and our academic bridge program. And our experience with the students, when they first came to Qatar, and speaking about the recognition of their qualifications, at the beginning we actually placed them in 12th grade because we didn't know they didn't have their qualifications. But then immediately after, we realized that they've learned. They've already gained this knowledge while they were in Afghanistan. They just didn't have their credentials. So because of the ecosystem that we have in the foundation, we were immediately able to place them in the academic bridge program, which is designed to actually help all students to do the standardized testing that they need to do, put together their applications for universities and so on. We realized very quickly that there was several cases where the majority of students had their transcripts, but they didn't have their diplomas with them. So we had to kind of step in and put together letters to explain the situation and explain that they how they left Afghanistan and all of that. And some of the universities that we've been working with and have a working relationship with recognize this letter, and where the students have been able to continue their education there. We have one case of a student who left without any kind of credential, so not even her transcript. And we're actually looking now on how to support her. And this is where the UQP, the Universal Qualification Passport with the UNESCO, becomes very important. It could be one way for her to pursue credentials, but we spoke about, for example, getting her GAD, putting her in a school here, but it's really not fair. So it's important for organizations like us to come together, design a program, a globally recognized program that will support the students. We have great success stories, which I can talk about later, but it really took all of these stakeholders to come together to support the students and help them move forward with their education.
Thank you so much, Hind, for those direct experiences right here in Qatar. And Marina, we'd like to hear a little bit from you with respect to these direct experiences with recognizing credentials, given that your association, your organization does just this, it evaluates.
So yes, I represent Association of Credential Evaluators, which actually constitute a community of practice. Because what we see is in our daily life, of course, credentials, documentation, we see education systems. We should have understanding of how education systems are working in different countries, how they are all connected, and how we can interpret this information to all the stakeholders who might need to have information about how this qualification is evaluated and how it's seen. And here I should say that we are working both for the individuals, because we have to cater for their needs where they are, in the situation where they are, but also keeping in mind national challenges, national needs, and understanding what kind of systems we need to put in place in order for the refugees and most marginalized populations to succeed in their ambitions. In order to do that, we exchange our experiences, we do different peer learning activities, courses, in order to understand how we can help each other, how we can also enrich our inventory of tools in order to help refugees in different situations, because we never know what type of qualification we are going to receive tomorrow. But what we know is that we have very good colleagues, either sitting nearby me or sitting across the ocean, which we can connect anytime and ask for help. And this is the strength of the community of practice of credential evaluators, and also the organization which I represent here, the TACEIP. It's the Association of Credential Evaluation Professionals. It's an international organization which also, where the credential evaluators are involved in evaluation of refugees' qualifications, also within the framework of the UNESCO qualifications passport for refugees, where we do the trainings and capacity buildings, and also see how this type of international programs can complement national programs, national approaches, and how we can enrich each other's experience, and how we work together in order to help individuals, because working together gives us strength. Thank you.
Well said, well said. Thank you very much, Marina. So many of you have shared success stories and promising practices. As we think about these promising practices, I'd like to open up the floor for last comments before we give the platform and the stage to our youth representatives. It's important to give them ample time to speak. So considering these success stories and promising practices that your institutions have been able to leverage and enact, what key incentives for this adoption of the Universal or the UNESCO Qualifications Passport and other types of recognition of prior learning programs do you wish for policy actors to know? I'm going to turn to Luca, if you wouldn't mind, in approximately 1 minute hearing your words. We're then going to move to Kate, and then to Marina, and as well as Yayoi. Final comments about these success stories and how they can be leveraged. Thank you.
Thanks a million. First of all, we increase our competencies as credential evaluators. This is the main point for us. So I put the point of successful stories for the development of the center and capacity of a center, national, international level. This is clear. Considering the fact we use that methodology, we increase the level of the qualification for people that have the papers, and also for timing. Right now, in 15 days, we can evaluate and see if verify a qualification. That is incredible as a time for evaluating a qualification and make a comparison. Second story, recently, Ukraine, we discovered that we need now technology, digitalization in our field. Ukraine is very high digitalized. They arrive and come in our country without documents, but thanks to the fact that they have all the diplomas in a system, digitalized system, also without papers, we can directly recognize, and it's very interesting that part. And the third part is a general message. We use also to recognize qualification from not recognized territories. There are a lot of territories that on diplomatic level we don't recognize. But why we do that? Because the academic sector is the sector where there is the most dialogue with institutions, people, researchers, students, also because people, even if they live in a territory that is not recognized, they need schools, universities, etc. And so the academic sector is fundamental because we don't see borders or barriers in order to recognize something that someone is able to do. And this is very interesting as a concept and to open the mind of people on that culture of recognition. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to contribute one reflection that is based on perhaps most recent experience that we have, which is the need for institutions, universities, and different stakeholders along this chain to be able to provide even more emergency support mechanisms. I will say that this is something that has certainly come out of the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban, but also more recently by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The way in which we have been able to as quickly as possible, adapt to those emergency situations and provide, I will say, potentially short-term solutions. So this doesn't mean that we don't want to accompany for a long term, but this does not always fit the needs of the students who are concerned. So particularly in the context of the war on Ukraine, providing immediate capacities to welcome students who had been impacted by that so that they can continue their studies for a short period of time and hopefully go back or elsewhere, but they're continuing to gain credit and not lose time and not be directly, I would say, penalized by the war in terms of their studies at least. I think that's really part of our responsibility, and being able to be more agile and more immediate in our responses to that. I think that's a call for action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Marina.
Indeed, to build on what you have just said, call for action. We have to react to emergency, and we can do it also keeping in mind short-term solutions, while keeping maybe in mind the opportunity to build on this type of solutions and gain experience from what we are doing today in order to build maybe more sustainable systems in the future. But we have to start somewhere. We have to address the emergency as it is now, as we see it, thinking about the elements we have to complement today. But by gaining this experience, we can also come into the in a position to create something more sustainable, and also in cooperation with other stakeholders, because this type of short-time strategy exercise can help us to identify the right stakeholders nationally and also internationally, in order to get support and in order also to be a part of a bigger ecosystem, of the bigger world, so to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. Sind?
So we've been able to identify three areas where maybe we can share and we can build on with the rest of international communities that are helping in this space. The first point is acute awareness of the situation for each refugee or each student, where they're coming from, what is their the system that they're coming from, what sort of credentialing the system typically applies, and how we can then move that to their target destination, so wherever they want to learn and close that gap, basically. The second one is collaboration across all dimensions, whether it's political, financial, auxiliary services when they're in the country waiting to be hosted to their final destination. Everything, the system has to work together to support them. And then the third point is really the willingness of the accrediting or the host country, the first stepping stone after they leave their country, but then the willingness of the host country, the final destination, the host institution, to actually consider their special situation and take them on. What we've seen is through willingness we've been able to, and through goodwill we've been able to remove a lot of barriers, and I think goodwill goes a long way in these situations.
Thank you very much, Hind. And last words, Ms. Yayoi.
Thank you very much. I'd like to make 3 points very much in agreement with colleagues who've mentioned already here. The first point is from us, it's important to recognize that 62 passports have been issued. That means life for young people who have gone through so much. So we have to come together in whatever it takes to increase that. And I think we are around the table, and also the partners around the world can make it happen. And in order for us to do that, we really need to support the member states, countries, who identify gaps in their system so that they can respond in a systemic manner. At the end of the day, particularly refugee young people, children around the world who flee, they're very much supported by host countries. So we need to support host countries to strengthen the system, and we have seen that already remarkable a shift in short time in Kenya and Uganda that we have started working together. And the last point is the partnership. I think it's mentioned already here, and the fact that only 6% have access to tertiary, this is not acceptable. It has to change. The UNHCR has this big campaign, 50 by 30. We have 7 years to go until reaching 2030. We really have to step up to support this field. And just one comment is this emergency situations, too little investment goes to tertiary education. Primary, secondary, large number of children affected, important for them to have the foundation to go through, but we know very well the crises are protracted in Syria's situation. Yemen, Ukraine, unfortunately, we see it protracted. Therefore, we need to have a pathway to follow, and tertiary education, it shouldn't be left alone, but we have to include tertiary education from the very beginning so that there's a pathway for life through and in education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. And so what you saw in front of you for the last less than an hour is expertise from inter-agencies working together. It looks like we have the drive, we have the mechanisms, we have the humanity to make this happen. It is just accelerating and catalyzing those efforts. I want to thank each one of our panelists today, Luca, Kate, Marina, Hind, and Yayoi. Thank you very much for providing your expertise. We will come back for question and answers, but I will make you just room for our youth to come up. And as we transfer one panel into the second segment, I will cue IT to please play an important video to talk a little bit more about the UNESCO qualifications passport. Thank you very much.
Je suis docteur en médecine humaine.
Je suis congolaise, je suis infirmière.
I got my grade 12 certificate in teaching.
Je tiens à préciser que même ceux qui nous suivent, ce passeport, ce n'est pas un document de voyage, mais c'est un document de reconnaissance de votre niveau d'études ou de ce que vous avez suivi comme instruction. Et donc, ça va devoir nous permettre de pouvoir faire reconnaître nos études.
I'm encouraging them to be educated because education is the key for success.
Je dis aussi merci à l'UNESCO et de ne pas oublier les réfugiés parce que les réfugiés aussi sont des êtres humains qui ont besoin d'assistance. Et je pense qu'avec ça, c'est un bon démarrage et je pense que ça va donner du goût aux autres.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Esma. I'm a former youth advocate with Education Above All. And while I was with Education Above All, I would meet students and beneficiaries where they were and would bring their messages. So I'm particularly honored and excited to actually have those students and those beneficiaries here with us today. To add to the conversation of accessing education, higher education, and LDCs. We have with us online, I'm not sure if he's still online, but he was introduced briefly by Stefania, Biarurima Levi from Congo. Biarurima received his UQP while he was a refugee in Zambia at the Meheba camp, and he is now currently studying or pursuing his master's degree in Italy. And so it would be truly an honor to hear from him his journey about how he obtained the UQP and how that has changed his educational journey. Levi will be speaking in French, and so I would encourage you to use the headphones available if needed. I have with me here in person as well John Iwutu from Uganda. John is a student at Georgetown University in Qatar, and he's currently a junior pursuing his degree in culture and politics. John is also an alumni of the ALA program in South Africa, the African Leadership Academy. I also have with me Jemima Atahigwa, also from Uganda, and also a student at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in Qatar. Jemima is pursuing her undergraduate degree in international economics, is a junior and also alumni of the African Leadership Academy. So Dr. Samah posed a question to the panelists about what was the actual process of obtaining a UQP, sort of removing some of the ambiguities of that. And so I would love to hear from Levi online. Levi, can you share with us your educational journey before obtaining the UQP while you were in Zambia, and then how you came to learn about and eventually receive the UQP?
et aux migrants vulnérables. Le passeport de qualification de l'UNESCO est un outil global destiné à faciliter la reconnaissance des qualifications des réfugiés, même en l'absence de la documentation complète. Un outil très important pour chaque intellectuel vivant dans un pays de refuge, mettant en valeur toutes les qualifications obtenues dans son pays d'origine. Il s'inspire de l'expérience du passeport européen. Le projet UQP a débuté en 2019 en Zambie, au camp de Meeba, dans le district de Kamindila. 11 réfugiés ont obtenu ce UQP après la collation. Et en 2021, deuxième partie ou deuxième groupe dont je fais partie, nous l'avons obtenu à 12 réfugiés. Ce passeport est obtenu gratuitement après avoir rempli un questionnaire écrit et passé à une interview orale, soit en présentiel ou par vidéoconférence. Ce UQP, je l'avais obtenu grâce aux informations de certains sensibilisateurs du premier groupe. Et après avoir été sensibilisé par le premier groupe, l'un de ces sensibilisateurs, je suis parti au bureau de la Caritas pour me rassurer si c'est réellement une bonne affaire ou pas. Arrivé au bureau de Caritas, la Caritas m'avait beaucoup parlé de ce projet, et c'est là que j'avais eu le courage de postuler, et d'écrire ou de remplir le questionnaire. Après avoir rempli le questionnaire, j'avais été sélectionné à passer à une interview. C'est après l'interview que j'ai été sélectionné parmi les 12 qui ont été sélectionnés en 2021. C'est un document très important pour les réfugiés, car avant d'obtenir les UQP, j'avais essayé de postuler pour que je puisse quand même enseigner j'en avais essayé et ça a été favorable. J'avais été vraiment bien reçu par les chefs d'établissement de l'école au bloc B. Et j'avais quand même à enseigner pendant 1 ou 2 semaines avant que l'opportunité de postuler et de venir ici à l'Italie n'arrive. Et UQP, c'est un document qui nous sert à appliquer dans des opportunités de bourse d'études en Zambie ou ailleurs, avoir un emploi en Zambie sans discrimination. Il nous sert aussi à valoriser notre intellectualisme en mettant en valeur nos qualifications obtenues dans les pays d'origine. Ce passeport de qualification de l'UNESCO, comme ça dit, passeport, nombreux peuvent penser que c'est un document de voyage, mais ce n'est pas un document de voyage, ce n'est ni aussi un document qui remplace tous les documents obtenus ou les diplômes obtenus. Ce n'est pas aussi un document qui garantisse automatiquement l'accès aux opportunités d'études ni à l'emploi. C'est-à-dire que quand vous obtenez le UQP, vous devez obligatoirement avoir l'emploi ou vous devez obligatoirement aller faire les études ou poursuivre vos études. L'objectif étant que dans ce délai, les réfugiés et les migrants vulnérables aient la possibilité d'améliorer les compétences technologie de la communication et multimédia. Je n'ai pas eu à donner mes diplômes originaux. Je vais juste présenter les passeports de qualification de l'UNESCO et cela ne m'a posé aucun problème pendant tout le processus de cette opportunité. À ce fait, nous remercions l'UNESCO, nous remercions l'UNICOR, ainsi que toutes les organisations qui et qui prennent toujours le courage d'assister les réfugiés, d'assister aussi les vulnérables, afin qu'ils aillent aussi plus loin et qu'ils étudient beaucoup plus. Nous remercions aussi également les UNHCR et la Caritas qui nous avaient assistés pendant tout le processus de cette opportunité. Un exemple, pour la recherche du passeport, nous avons été assistés par l'AS et la Caritas, la recherche du visa, ils nous payaient parfois les transports, quitter les camps de répit jusqu'à Lusaka. Nous remercions aussi même le gouvernement zambien pour les efforts fournis pour le bien-être des réfugiés. Et pour clore, je vais dire à tout le monde et au monde, à toutes les nations du monde, surtout aux gens plus marginalisés, et surtout aux réfugiés, aux migrants, que ce passeport de qualification de l'UNESCO, vraiment, c'est un document très important, que personne ne le néglige pas, mais c'est un document très important qui peut quand même vous amener très loin si les compétences vous donnent cette opportunité. Et à chaque fois quand tu as une opportunité, ce document est capable de justifier et de mettre en valeur vos qualifications et tous vos diplômes obtenus. J'ai quelques suggestions à suggérer à ce qui concerne cette conférence. Je suggérerais à toutes les organisations chargées de l'éducation au monde et à l'UNESCO en particulier que nous devons clairement sensibiliser les gens avant de les amener à appliquer, car nombreux appliquent en pensant que c'est une solution finale ou automatique aux problèmes quotidiens qu'ils ont dans leur milieu de refuge. Parfois, ceux-ci viennent des sensibilisateurs qui disent aux gens qu'il faut obtenir UPP, la vie va changer et ils seraient soit engagés ou aller en dehors de l'Afrique pour le travail ou pour les études. Ce serait en train d'obtenir soit des vivres ou non-vivres, obtenir des vélos, obtenir les biens d'autres seront garantis par l'UNESCO aux détenteurs de UPP. Il n'est pas bon qu'une personne puisse l'obtenir sans connaître la valeur de l'UPP, sans connaître ses finalités. Les gens doivent appliquer et obtenir le passeport de qualification de l'UNESCO tout en sachant son importance et tout en sachant ses finalités. Et ceci est la responsabilité des organisations chargées de l'éducation, en particulier l'UNESCO, la sensibilisation avant de procéder à l'application de l'UPP doit être très importante plutôt, et les informations, donner aux gens les informations claires, bien définies, ça serait vraiment une bonne chose si c'est fait aux réfugiés. Mais aussi, je vais dire à tout le monde qu'au camp des réfugiés, nombreux intellectuels sont des gradués, d'autres sont des licenciés. Alors, je veux dire que l'UNESCO doit penser quand même à ces gradués-là, puisque c'est un peu difficile pour eux de poursuivre les études. Ils se sont arrêtés à 3 ans après les études. C'est un peu difficile qu'ils poursuivent. Alors, c'est devant de la compétence de l'UNESCO pour que ces gens puissent quand même puissent trouver quand même l'importance de UPP. Parce que ce n'est pas trop important de l'avoir et qu'après 5 ans, UPP puisse expirer sans jouir aucune importance de UPP. Et pour clôturer, je crois que l'objectif de cette conférence, c'est de promouvoir l'éducation et de ne laisser personne derrière pour les pays moins avancés et pour tout le monde, tous les gens marginalisés, toutes les personnes qui sont déconsidérées dans le monde, malgré leurs compétences, malgré leurs études. Et ceci vient des pays moins avancés. Surtout dans ces pays moins avancés, on trouve aussi des milieux plus moins avancés. Sur ces globes, sur cette terre, il existe encore des écoles sans craie, sans tableau, sans banc, sans enseignants, où trouver les enseignants eux-mêmes n'avaient même pas fini les études. Et c'est là que ça crée le complexe d'infériorité ou de supériorité. Quelqu'un peut avoir étudié, mais il a toujours ces complexes d'infériorité envers les autres. Ça, c'est l'exemple des réfugiés, c'est l'exemple des gens marginalisés. À cet effet, je nous invite vraiment à tout le monde qui est marginalisé à c'est important, un document qui met en valeur les qualifications obtenues dans un pays d'origine. Quand vous êtes déjà dans un pays de refuge, ce document va vous aider à progresser sur la vie sociale, intellectuelle et même sur la vie quotidienne. Merci.
Thank you, Levi. Thank you. We're truly honored to have heard from one of 64 UKP holders. Transitioning slightly to the topic of assessing higher education more broadly. John, you attended the African Leadership Academy program in South Africa. Can you share very briefly with the audience an overview of that program?
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here today. So I attended the African Leadership Academy in Johannesburg, South Africa, and this is particularly a pre-university diploma program that brings together students from across the African continent. So usually we have students from over 40 countries in the same class, about 120 of us. So the class is very diverse, from very diverse educational systems, from Francophone, from Lusophone, so from very, very diverse educational systems. And we are brought together for 2 years to, learn how to become, the leaders that the continent needs very much. We are deeply immersed in the study of the African continent. So we have courses in African studies and also courses in entrepreneurial leadership, because by 2050 the African continent is going to have it's going to be the most populated continent with so many people, and with the young people in the future. So the academy provides us the opportunity to learn how we can be the change makers the continent is going to need by immersing us in very different and very rigorous academic immersions that allow us to become better people and allow us to become critical thinkers, allow us to become better communicators, so that when we go on to university, we have the foundation that we need to seek the higher education opportunities that allow us to advance ourselves even further.
And Jemima, you were also an alumni of the ALA program. Can you share with us how that has changed your
applications to around the globe to attend universities? We had the called university counselors that were guiding us through the application process, something I believe if I were in Uganda, I wouldn't have easily accessed. And also LA as an institution collaborated with different organizations like Education Above All, which is currently sponsoring our undergraduate education currently at Georgetown University. So it collaborating with other organizations also outreach that gave us access to such opportunities.
Thank you. Wrapping up very briefly, both John and Jemima, what message do you have for policymakers about higher education and LDCs?
I would say there's a fundamental need for more partnerships within the African continent, and these partnerships can be within the countries themselves and within the wider global community, because I believe that these are the kind of partnerships that are going to advance education on the continent, education around the world. As the panel of experts that we had also mentioned that we're going to need to work together to try to ensure that students and vulnerable persons, refugees. May I also say that Uganda is one of the few LDCs with the most refugee populations. As of a year ago, we had about 1.5 million refugees, displaced persons coming from South Sudan, the DRC, Burundi as well, and some from Somalia. And there's a lot of effort towards building communities around them and supporting them. And we're going to need a lot of partnerships to be able to continue supporting these refugees, because they end up going into communities, host communities that also have challenges, right? So it exacerbates the situation, and so support for them would need to be more, and partnerships are one way that can be able to do that.
Just to add on what John said, my suggestion is in terms of cost sharing. Something that isn't popular in Uganda, from my experience, there is need to expand student loans like how it is in the US, so that we can get more people to access higher education. And another way is for the government to at least take a percentage of the cost and also give access for the students to access higher education. And another thing is, well, as we are trying to bring in people into universities, how is the curriculum availing the students with skills so that they can accumulate the capital to respond to the labor market. So it's something that when we are formulating these policies, we need to also look at how Credential and how popular is this curriculum and which skills is it giving these students to participate in the job market. Yeah.
Thank you. Stefania mentioned during her keynote that 75% of refugees are in LDCs, so definitely Uganda has been a large host to those refugees. And thank you both for your message about how best to further help host countries access refugee education.